Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're heading way south to Argentina, where their new president, Javier Milei, just made a splash with a pretty controversial economic policy. Some are calling it Megacanje 2.0. Now, I know what you're thinking, Megacanje. It sounds more like a new streaming service than an economic policy, right?
It's definitely a catchy name,
Yeah.
but it carries a lot of weight in Argentina. To understand why we need to go back a bit, in 2001, during one of Argentina's worst economic crises, the government at the time implemented a debt restructuring program. They called it Megacanje.
So this Megacanje 2.0 is like a sequel. And we all know how sequels usually go.
Well, the comparison has a lot of people on edge.
Yeah.
See, Milei chose the NY Stock Exchange for this major announcement. Talk about a power move, right? And let's just say the reception was mixed.
Okay, so we've got a new president, a bold policy announcement on Wall Street, and a name that evokes a bit of economic PTSD for Argentinians. Let's unpack this Megacanje 2.0. What exactly does it involve?
In the simplest terms, it's a debt swap. Argentina is trying to renegotiate the terms of its loans to avoid defaulting. Think of it like refinancing your mortgage. You're basically trying to get a better interest rate or a longer repayment period to make your payments more manageable.
That makes sense. But something tells me it's not quite as straightforward as refinancing your house.
You're right. There are a few key differences. First, the scale of this debt swap is enormous. We're not talking about a single mortgage. We're talking about billions of dollars of debt owed to various international creditors.
Okay, so high stakes already. What
Yeah.
else?
The second factor that makes this situation so delicate is that Argentina is already in a precarious economic position. They're grappling with high inflation, low foreign currency reserves, and a history of, shall we say, rocky relationships with international lenders.
And this is where the ghost of 2001 comes back to haunt us, right?
Exactly, that 2001 Megacanje. It was supposed to be a solution, a way to buy Argentina time and stave off economic disaster.
Yeah.
But it ended up backfiring, exacerbating their debt problems and ultimately contributing to a complete economic meltdown.
So with that history in mind, I can see why this new Megacanje is causing some anxiety. But what makes it so risky? Is it just a repeat of 2001, or are there new factors at play?
It's a bit of both, actually. This new debt swap shares some similarities with the 2001 version, but there are also some crucial differences that could make it even riskier. For starters, the economic context is different. In 2001, Argentina had a fixed exchange rate, which ultimately became unsustainable. Today, they have a floating exchange rate, which offers more flexibility but also exposes them to more volatility.
Okay, so a floating exchange rate means the value of the Argentine peso can fluctuate more freely. How does that impact the debt swap?
It adds a layer of unpredictability. If the peso were to depreciate sharply, as it's done in the past, the cost of servicing their debt in foreign currencies could skyrocket. It's like trying to pay off a dollar-denominated credit card with a shrinking paycheck. It gets harder and harder to keep up.
And that could be a recipe for disaster, especially given Argentina's already fragile economy.
Exactly. And here's where another parallel to 2001 emerges, the lack of consensus and the potential for social unrest. Back then, the Megacanje was deeply unpopular with many Argentinians. It was seen as a bailout for foreign creditors at the expense of ordinary citizens.
And are we seeing similar sentiments this time around?
Absolutely. The article mentions former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, a very influential figure in Argentine politics who has publicly criticized Megacanje 2.0, calling it reckless, and even accusing Milei's government of wanting to set the country on fire again in the bonfire of debt.
Wow, that's a pretty scathing indictment. So it seems like Milei is facing opposition not just from financial markets, but from within Argentina as well.
Precisely. And this internal division is critical because it highlights the lack of a unified front, which is essential for any economic policy, let alone one as complex and potentially risky as a debt restructuring. This lack of unity can also erode trust in the government's ability to manage the economy, leading to further instability.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more people doubt the policy, the more likely it is to fail. But aside from the exchange rate and the political climate, what other factors make this Megacanje 2.0 so different from the one in 2001?
One word: transparency, or rather the lack thereof. This time around, the article explains Milei's administration used a presidential decree known as a DNU to push through the debt swap without congressional approval.
Okay, hold on, a DNU. That sounds intense. What exactly does that mean?
Essentially, it allows the president to bypass the legislative process and enact policies directly. While DNUs can be used in emergencies, they're controversial because they can be seen as an overreach of executive power.
So not only is Milei making a risky economic move, but he's doing it in a way that some see as undemocratic.
That's the crux of the issue. The use of DNU has further inflamed critics who argue that it lacks transparency and accountability. It feeds into this narrative that Milei's government is acting unilaterally without considering the potential consequences for the Argentine people.
It sounds like they're walking a tightrope here, and the slightest misstep could have major consequences.
Exactly. And the article suggests that this lack of transparency could also backfire with investors. When you're dealing with debt restructuring on this scale, trust is paramount. If investors perceive Milei's government as being opaque or unpredictable, they may be less willing to cooperate, which can make it even harder for Argentina to secure favorable terms for their debt.
So it's not just about the numbers, it's about perception, about confidence, about trust.
Precisely. Economics is often as much about psychology as it is about numbers. And right now, the psychology surrounding Argentina's economy is pretty fragile.
Okay, so we've talked about the lack of consensus, the exchange rate volatility, and the transparency concerns surrounding this mega canje 2.0. But at its core, isn't this debt swap supposed to help Argentina avoid defaulting?
It's intended to buy them time and breathing room, yes. But the key question is whether it will be enough. And to answer that, we need to look at what Milei's government is banking on to make this whole thing work.
So they're buying time, hoping for an economic miracle. But what are the chances of that actually happening?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no crystal ball to tell us for sure. The article does mention that Milei's team is putting a lot of faith in their ability to attract foreign investment and boost economic growth. They're essentially betting that a rising tide will lift all boats, including Argentina's heavily indebted one.
But haven't we heard that tune before? Argentina has a long history of boom and bust cycles.
You're right to be skeptical. The article also highlights Argentina's track record, and it's not exactly a glowing endorsement of their ability to manage debt or maintain economic stability.
So let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Let's say this gamble doesn't pay off. What are the potential consequences?
Well, in the worst-case scenario, it could lead to another default, which would be catastrophic. Imagine being cut off from international credit markets, facing soaring interest rates, and potentially even seeing your currency collapse. It would be like the economic turmoil of 2001, but potentially even worse.
It's hard to even fathom the impact that would have on everyday Argentinians.
It's a sobering thought. And keep in mind, even if Argentina manages to avoid a full-blown default, there are still significant risks associated with this mega canje 2.0.
Like what?
Well, one concern is that this debt swap could lead to even more austerity measures down the road. Think cuts to social programs, reduce public spending, and potentially even higher taxes.
And those are the kinds of measures that often hit the most vulnerable members of society the hardest.
Exactly. And that's why many economists and social activists are worried that this mega canje 2.0, while intended to stabilize the economy, could actually exacerbate inequality and social unrest.
It's a complex situation with no easy answers, but there's one more detail from the article that I found particularly intriguing. It mentions Argentina's decision to withdraw from the Pact of the Future at the UN. What's the story there?
That's another bold move by the Milei administration, and it's one that has generated a lot of controversy. The Pact of the Future, also known as the Global Compact for Sustainable Development, is an agreement signed by nearly 200 countries, including Argentina.
What does it cover?
It outlines a framework for international cooperation on a wide range of issues, from climate change to poverty reduction to promoting peace and security. It's essentially a roadmap for a more sustainable and equitable future.
So why on earth would Argentina pull out of something like that?
That's a question many are asking. The article suggests that Milei's administration sees the pact as outdated and too interventionist. They argue that it infringes on Argentina's sovereignty and doesn't align with their vision for economic development.
So it seems like they're not just making waves in financial markets, but also on the global stage.
Exactly. And this decision to withdraw from the Pact of the Future could have far-reaching consequences for Argentina.
Like what?
Well, for one, it could further isolate them diplomatically and economically. The pact is all about collaboration and shared responsibility. By stepping away, Argentina risks being seen as unreliable or unwilling to engage in global efforts to tackle pressing issues.
It's almost like they're going it alone at a time when global cooperation is more important than ever.
Precisely. And this decision could also have implications for their access to international aid and investment. Many donors and investors prioritize countries that are committed to sustainable development and good governance. By distancing themselves from the pact, Argentina might be signaling that they're not as committed to these principles.
So to sum it all up, Argentina is in a very precarious position. They've undertaken this risky Megacanje 2.0 to avoid default, but it's unclear whether it will work. They're facing internal divisions, external skepticism, and they've alienated themselves on the world stage. Is that a fair assessment?
I think that captures the essence of the situation.
Mhm.
Argentina is at a crossroads, facing a perfect storm of economic, social, and political challenges.
It's a lot to process, and it's hard not to feel a sense of unease about what the future holds for Argentina.
It's a reminder that economics is not just about numbers and graphs, it's about people's lives. The decisions made in the halls of power have real-world consequences, and in Argentina's case, those consequences could be particularly profound.
It's a story that will continue to unfold in the days and weeks to come. We'll certainly be watching closely and keeping you informed. For now, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the complexities of Argentina's economic situation. Until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.